Well, this next panel should be really interesting, moderated by my good friend Ryan Lawler. We're going to be talking about transportation discovery. I have to say, when I think about hailing a cab, I do not immediately think social. So I'll be interested to hear what these guys have to say about that. Let's bring them up onto the stage. Ryan, a writer at TechCrunch, will be joined by Steve Humphreys, the CEO of Flywheel, Logan Green, co-founder and CEO of Lyft, Andre Haddad, the CEO of RelayRides, and Sunil Paul, co-founder and CEO of Sidecar. Please welcome them to the stage.
Thanks, everyone. So I want to get started. We have a lot of new ways to find transportation, whether that means getting an on-demand ride from point A to point B, whether it means like getting renting a car, which would be just a normal person's car. But what ties all this together is mobile technology. What ties it together is identity, social. A few of you have Facebook Connect as your default. Some of you don't. But in all cases, really what makes these things work is tying the user to sort of in-app and identity to a social profile. So I just want to start out, this is kind of a softball question, but I'm sure all of you have sort of market sizing around, how much money is spent on cabs, how much money is spent on rental cars, but what is really the opportunity here? Is it bigger than that? Are we talking about replacing cars altogether, getting rid of second cars? And when you do that, how much money is really sort of left over?
You want me to just take a shot at that to start with? Just coming from the taxi world, because that's our focus. There's 4 million taxi rides a day in this country alone. There's 1 billion taxi rides, about 5 times that worldwide. And those taxis are about half utilized, so they're half unutilized. So it's a huge opportunity, it's a huge activity. Human transportation, getting ourselves around, is one of the fundamental activities, along with eating and communication and everything else. So I think social has a huge role in that. And by creating a discovery platform, which to a great extent we're all doing, to find those rides, it's a huge activity and it's a huge opportunity. It's also one of the more green and sustainable things you can do. 50% utilized. Those cabs are driving around the city right now. If you get in and use one that you wouldn't have used before through a social discovery platform, you're taking a free ride with no carbon footprint, no extra utilization of infrastructure. So it's a tremendous opportunity. No more cars on the street in your city, by the way. So it's huge economically as well as socially and environmentally, I think.
Ryan, my view on this is a monster opportunity. I mean, this is probably the biggest opportunity I've ever seen. I've started many companies. I've been an investor in dozens of companies. This represents an opportunity that's as big as all of retail commerce. It is that massive. It's measured, that market size is measured in a T, as in trillion. And we are just at the early stages of it. I mean, all of these ideas that are represented on the stage, Sidecar and all the rest, are just beginning that whole opportunity. And I think that we're going to look back on this era and realize that it's the beginning of a big transformation, just like the transformation of retail commerce from e-commerce. In fact, I predict that 10 years from now, car ownership will be cut in half because of the innovations that are happening in transportation today.
Hey, if you agree, disagree?
So I would think that I would agree with Sunil. I mean, I think it's a huge business opportunity. At RelayRides, we think about our immediate market opportunity is the rental industry, which is a $30 billion industry in the US, $60 billion worldwide, and frankly hasn't innovated a lot over the last few years. But our ultimate vision is really to have people access a marketplace where they can get a car for a day or two or 3 or a week or a month so easily that they really don't need to own a second car or a truck or a first car. And if we do fulfill that vision one day, we're determined to get closer to it every day. It's $1 trillion of transportation that's being spent on car ownership today, and in the U.S. alone, there's 250 million cars in the U.S., 1 billion worldwide. That's increasing by 25 million net every year, and I think we can really make the access to this asset rather than the ownership of this asset much more efficient. And I think there's fundamental economic value that's created here for both the person who's accessing the asset when they need it, as well as the person who ends up, sharing that asset, that I think it's a huge opportunity.
Yeah, when you look at household expenses, transportation is the second highest household expense at 20%. Housing is at about a third of households' budgets. So I don't think there's any coincidence that when you're looking at the collaborative consumption space and everything that's going on there, that you have housing and transportation as the top two categories. I think what we're seeing in this movement is really we now have the infrastructure to put this information and trust layer over the world. And when you can put that layer over the world, all of a sudden you can find people in that city you're traveling to, who have extra space in their apartment, or you can find, your neighbor who happens to be taking a trip to the same place as you. It opens up this massive world of opportunity.
Okay, so as we talk about transportation moving from this ownership to more of an access model, I'm wondering how that scales beyond urban environments. I mean, I used to live in New York, now I live in San Francisco. I haven't owned a car in probably 10 years. And I've been fine with that because, I have public transportation and I have, a robust cab system and now a robust rideshare or Uber system. But how does that scale beyond city centers to, help people in the suburbs and rural areas, et cetera?
I think the important thing to remember, first of all, you are our people. I mean, people who don't own a car, that is like core demographic for Sidecar and for, I'm sure, other companies in the sector. But this is such early days. We did a survey and found that even, like we all think in this crowd, we already know about the space and understand what's what. But in fact, only 20% of people who've taken a taxi have ever heard of any of us. So this is still early days. The opportunity to build critical mass in the cities and spread out from there, I think is the evolution that we're going to see over the next few years.
I'd add that the way RelayRides has evolved over the last couple of years has been frankly fascinating to me and to the team at RelayRides. We didn't really foresee that kind of evolution. When we launched last year in March nationwide, we frankly didn't think that we'd be in 50 states and 1,500 cities 12 months later, and that's what happened. And we ended up, having people use us in places that were not big cities. And we've been fascinated also by the evolution from, Ryan, your use case of I need immediate transportation is a very sound and important use case for even our marketplace for hourly rentals. But we're finding that people in more suburban areas or less densely populated areas are using RelayRides for longer duration rentals, for daily rentals, weekly. We launched monthly 2 months ago, and it's already bigger than an hourly business. So we're finding that people, the concept of access doesn't necessarily mean in our niche of the market, doesn't necessarily mean just a trip for a couple hours or running errands. It could be I want to get a car for a couple weeks because I'm traveling. And instead of using a traditional sort of fleet-based rental, I'm just going to use my neighbor's car.
I think the comment about it being early days is just huge. There's going to be so many emergent properties that come out of this experience as we build out the platforms. If you put us all together and all the other vendors, we do a few million rides a year out of that billion that I cited. We're well under 1% here. And there's all kinds of different use cases that people are discovering. I mean, one of the ones that we've just seen starting to take off is, someone calls you and says, I need a ride home. Well, you can send them a cab, go ahead and pay for it, and they can settle up when they get back with you, or it's just a favor for a friend. It's an emergent use that never existed before that the capabilities are just starting to enable. And that's only urban. When you start to see it spread across the Bay Area, I mean, we have a great Petri dish here in the area because we have San Francisco, a very dense urban area with a lot of transit issues. We've got San Jose, and then we've got the broader Bay Area where you see all the modes. And we're starting to see lots of different use cases that pop up, and I think it's going to behoove us to listen really hard and respond really fast as we see use cases and just follow them in. And I can't tell you what it's going to look like. It's going to look entirely different in even 5 years from the way personal transportation looks right now.
Yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity in the suburban markets because there are so few other options there. So in a suburban town, you're virtually required to own a car. There's probably poor, if any, public transportation service, poor, if any, sort of taxi service. And so I think with these types of crowdsourced services, that we have an opportunity to create a crowdsourced public transportation system that can actually provide better coverage in suburban areas than what governments can provide with typical public transit.
Okay, so when you talk about these peer-to-peer models, and I'm talking specifically to Logan, Sunil, and Andre here, where you've got marketplaces of regular people giving up their own cars or driving people around, how do you get users comfortable with that model? Of just renting someone else's car, just taking a ride with a regular dude who's not a licensed taxi or black car driver?
I think the core of that is trust. All of us operate marketplaces, and I think the foundation of any marketplace is trust. So I think we've done some similar things, but I can talk through what we've done. In the very beginning, we came out with $1 million per occurrence insurance policy, and I think that's really important for everybody to know. There's great coverage backing up every ride. Then there's been a lot of advances in background checks, and so within seconds we can run someone's DMV records, and we screen out anyone with too many tickets. We can also do criminal background checks, and those take a couple of days. But you can look at people's criminal convictions. We screen those people out. So I think you create a lot of trust by having a really high bar, and once people come in and experience that and realize that the bar is high and that they're having high quality experiences, they develop trust for that system.
We call it at RelayRides trust and safety, which is something we called it that way at eBay for many years where I worked there. And trust and safety is really the two aspects of the same equation. Trust is what consumers perceive, and then safety is the effective safety and protection that is provided by the marketplace. On the safety side, all of these marketplaces have done really breakthrough things that no one else did before. The idea of doing a real-time check of your driving record and being able to screen people based on your driving record, that's something that none of the car rental companies do. And in fact, at RelayRides, we're very strict on that screening. Anyone who's had a major violation ever cannot sign up for RelayRides, which means that the quality of the drivers on RelayRides is actually superior by far to the average quality of any driver on the roads. And similarly, we offer insurance, both covering the owner and the renter of the vehicle. And the level of liability protection that we offer with our insurance product is significantly above the minimum liability protection that most consumers across the country elect to buy for their personal policies. So again, we're making a lot of investments both in software and insurance. And by the way, that's really costly for a marketplace business like ours, to make sure that the marketplace is actually safe and protected. And from a trust standpoint, the way we try to communicate that to our consumers is by providing some of that data back to them in the form of ratings and reviews. Very classic there, sort of building on the footsteps of what eBay and other e-commerce players have done for many years.
Yes, first of all, insurance is an unsung hero in this entire world. I think eBay did kind of pioneer all this. Our chief revenue officer, Gregory Boutet, ran like 10 European countries for eBay, often says that trust is fundamental to being able to create these two-sided markets. And so we've implemented a lot of those things, and very similar to what you've just heard. But I want to talk about another element, which is there is huge benefit in creating community around this service. And there's a great story that illustrates this. In Los Angeles, one of our riders, Rachel, got a ride from Joseph, and they're chit-chatting along the way home, which unique experience for ride sharing. And he helps her take groceries up to. They just come from Whole Foods, and they're chit-chatting about Italian food, and they end up having dinner together. Now, that is an experience that you could just never imagine with today's transportation systems, but it happens all the time with Sidecar and these other peer-to-peer systems.
Is that necessarily an experience that everybody wants, though? I mean, on the one side, I know that you've both done a lot around community. I'm talking, about Sidecar and Lyft. But one piece of negative feedback that I do hear occasionally is, people don't necessarily want to have a conversation, like they just want to get from point A to point B, or at least that's the behavior that they're used to in prior sort of transportation regimes. So just trying to understand like how you get people used to this new behavior from the very beginning.
We have a very particular attitude about this, which is, our motto or a tagline is, my ride is your ride. So it's like being a host. When someone is in your car and they want to chill and do their email, you let them do that. You don't force yourself on them and say, entertain me with a conversation. So when you're in a sidecar experience, it really is the driver kind of gauging, okay, I get it, you want to chill and do your email. Or you want to have a conversation, or you want to have dinner.
I think part of it is just different product experiences, different service experiences. It's a difference from, most taxi drivers are professionals. They've chosen that as their job. They want to drive people around. They learn the city. And in any case, they're going to want to respond to what the customer wants. But there are customers who are going to want, more of a social interaction versus more of a professional interaction. I think the market is large enough for all of them. But that is a differentiation. If you have someone who's chosen this to be their job, and we talk about social discovery in the network there's a social network of the really great cab drivers that are starting to share more and more and to be able to provide more and more of a great experience in the city. And I think that's going to improve the professional platform of drivers, and the platform of other drivers and other sources will also be in there, just different experiences that they'll be providing.
Yeah, I think as pioneers in this space, we have to create this experience. Right, getting in a non-professional driver's car is different. That's brand new within the last year, and so what we've done is we've tried to sort of coach people on how to make that comfortable, how to make that fun and friendly. So encourage people to sit in the front seat. The driver, it feels like you're getting picked up by a friend, and we found in the first few rides we took on our own. Sitting in the back seat of an individual's car, it feels a little awkward. Now, some people want that experience and just want to go heads down and play on their phone. And I think it's, in this type of community environment, you just communicate. You say, I need a little time. I've got to go heads down and do some work. But we encourage that interaction because the people driving, on the Lyft platform aren't professional drivers and don't think of themselves as professional drivers. So I drive for Lyft all the time. And it's a lot more fun for the driver when the passenger sits up front and they tell you a story, they do something to brighten your day, you do something to brighten your day. And that's community building, that's fun.
We had underestimated, if I may, I know it's not exactly the same use case, but we had underestimated the effect of community at RelayRides. But we've been doing an interesting experiment for the last couple of years because we have two types of vehicles on our marketplace. We've got vehicles that we call mobile access. So you can actually use your cell phone to be able to unlock the vehicle, whether it's through OnStar or our own device that we plug into the car. And then we've got the majority of our cars, which you meet the owner in person. And of course, we track everything from consumer satisfaction, both on the renter side, the owner side. We look at claims and accidents and all kinds of data. And now we have enough of a big data set and enough transactions on both types of cars. And we somewhat unexpectedly, but perhaps humanly, the satisfaction of our customers for these transactions where they meet in person is actually several points higher than the satisfaction of the audience that uses the mobile access rentals, both on the owner and renter side. And interestingly, also both the sort of the claims and issues tend to be also lower when the owner and the renter meet in person and exchange the keys versus the completely anonymous sort of more rental car-like experience where you can access the vehicle with your mobile phone. So community is an interesting factor even in a business where the two parties are not sitting in the same car together, they're just exchanging keys.
Okay, so let's say you get users on board. Now here's the hard part. How do you get regulators on board? Andre, I know you've run into problems in New York. Sunil, you've had issues with regulators in some of the markets that you've entered. Logan, you haven't quite gotten there yet, but I'm assuming that as part of your expansion, you'll go into those markets as well. How do you convince those guys that this isn't a public safety issue, that rider passengers are going to be safe, and is it a public safety issue or is it just a lobbying issue?
Well, I think what we've discovered is, first of all, as we've been pioneers and moving out into new spaces, of course, we've run into regulators, and it's been a challenge. We've also discovered that when innovators and regulators work together, people win. I mean, we end up delivering things that everyday people really want. And that is our real strength, that we've got the wind to our backs. There is a kind of a huge wave of momentum behind, yes, this is a great service. The whole public safety thing, I think, is sort of put up as a reason to resist this change. But in fact, if you look at the behavior of people on the Sidecar platform, 71% feel safer than on a taxi or in a taxi. And our core heavy user demographic are 20-something women. So, and you've heard about all of the safety and insurance and all the things that we do. We have created a safer experience than what exists today. So I think we're going to have regulatory stuff is going to get solved over time.
Yeah, our experience with the PUC and both Lyft and Sidecar went through this. Shortly after launching, we got a cease and desist from the PUC. Opened up this conversation with them, and the key thing they care about is safety. And there's a lot of cynicism, I think, around the regulators are trying to shut down anything that's new or innovative, and that hasn't been our experience at all. When we've gone into those conversations with regulators, they're excited about this type of innovation. They're using Lyft. They love the service. They need to make sure it's safe, right? And so that's their job, is to protect the public. And so the conversation has been 100% centered on safety and really understanding the details and the mechanics behind how the system works. And I think being on the cutting edge of this, all of our companies have taken these additional safety steps that none of the incumbents have. Like Andre mentioned for rental cars, how they don't do a DMV check, and they do. Same with us. And we were actually able to, in our conversations with the PUC, talk about some of these screening techniques that aren't currently used for taxis and limos. So I think by pushing the envelope on safety and always being ahead of the curve on that, we can set a really, really high bar, and ultimately come to a great conclusion with regulators.
California's a great example of that collaboration. I would say elsewhere it has not been so collaborative. Yeah,
I think that our job really as innovators is to evangelize and educate the regulators. And I think what's challenging is for small companies like ours, we're technology focused and trying to build the product every day and trying to get adoption, is that we don't have like really large government relations teams. But I think it's just going to be part of this business. We're going to have to make these investments, and certainly my sense is that if we do a good job evangelizing and educating, we have a possibility to work really well within the existing regulatory schemes or evolving those regulations. The fundamental thing that a lot of regulators don't understand at the beginning is that it's in our selfish interest as a marketplace business to protect our customers. If there's no trust and safety in our marketplace, we don't have a business, right? We just don't have a business. And therefore, there's sort of a meetings of the minds when you sort of get into a regulator's office and tell them that's actually what we're making all these investments for. It's in order to protect people, and I think that could yield to really good results.
Steve, I know you want to jump in, but I have a question for you. I mean, how do you feel about this when all of the drivers on your system have gone through, are licensed drivers, they have bought the medallion or whatever, and now you have you're competing against a bunch of people who haven't jumped through those hoops. I mean, is it kind of unfair?
Well, I think the point on regulators being interested in safety, actually their first interest is getting great service for the people, the populace of their cities. That's what they really want. They want the city experience to be better. They're mostly political appointees. So we've had access to virtually all the regulators in all the major cities. And they're very supportive, and their conversations all about how do we get this great capability to our populace safely as well. So I think the bar is going to rise for everybody. We're all going to go through the same processes eventually. I hope everybody will comply to it. By the way, taxi drivers do go through criminal background checks and everything else as well, fingerprinting, and that's a good standard. I think it's not very hard to do. The regulators are trying to encourage the deployment of these social platforms for discovery of transportation. They understand underutilization. San Francisco understands the issue with utilization of taxi cabs, and they want to get that utilization up higher, and they want to get it deployed better. So it's a great dialogue that I hope we'll all engage in. And as hard as a small company, it's true, but the regulators can actually be very helpful. They bring us into most of the taxi companies we go with. They actually know who has the great standards, who's performing well, and they're very helpful, and they're very desirous of getting it into their cities as fast as possible.
Okay, so I have to ask this question because 3 of the 4 folks on this panel compete with Uber. And Uber cut their prices today. They say they're cheaper than a cab. I imagine they're competitive, if not lower than, Sidecar or Lyft's suggested donations. How do you compete with that when they already sort of have this scale and now they're trying to compete on price as well?
Well, I'll take that since it can be a little challenging. But price has to be a couple of things. First off, it has to be consistent. It has to be fair. It has to be transparent, and it also has to be sustainable. I mean, you can raise price and drop price all the time that you want. One of the great things we've been able to ride on the infrastructure of is taxi fares are very transparent, very visible. So you know exactly what it is and what you're going to pay, and people like that. It also has to be reasonable, and in town, getting around, we don't get negative feedback about the price of the taxi fare. Now, if you're going to go to Tahoe, don't take a taxi. But if you're going around town, it's generally a pretty fair price. And the other thing is, like Sunil, this is my 3rd startup, and I understand sustainable pricing, and I think most people in this room do too. And when people pay their taxi fare, I think they like the idea that some of that goes to licensing, it goes to inspecting the car, it goes to insurance. It's a sustainable price. And I think we're all hitting reasonable, sustainable prices. Grabbing the lowest price for a day is great, but we're trying to build long-term social networks, consumer commitment and reliability and trust. And I think consumers know you trust who's going to build something that's going to be there for the long term.
Real quick, I think Uber's been a little late to the game, and I think what they're realizing is they're having to come down to compete. But I don't think in a taxi, roughly 50% of the money goes towards the medallion holder. That's not what it costs to administer a background check. Uber's model has been around working with limo companies, and it's inherently structured on having a middleman, even with UberX. And that model gets very difficult to sustain at a lower price point. So I think what we're seeing is that, and over the next year, I think it's going to become a lot more clear, this game is about peer-to-peer. I think that's what that price point means, is that Uber is moving more and more towards peer-to-peer, and a year from now, that's all we're going to be talking about.
And just to really fast, you can't beat free. And as appreciation for this conference, anybody who leaves here in Sidecar has a free ride. So it's better than Uber, at least for today.
Okay. All right. Well, we got to wrap up. I want to thank all of you who stuck in through, I know lunch is out there waiting. I want to thank our panelists. And thanks, everybody.
Good.